Good afternoon. Thank you for being here at the 2019 Lake Oswego Festival of the Arts and being here in the special exhibit, Comics and Identity. We're really thrilled. Today's panel is really at the core of what this exhibit is about. It's comics activism. And we have here a whole team, which I will introduce briefly, but then let them introduce themselves in more detail. Brian Parker, Wynn and I, Ben Passmore, Clara Emiliana, Nicole Robinson, Farrell Golding, and Shaun Wynn. Here today to discuss comics activism, comics and activism, what this form that we're celebrating in the gallery can do as a means towards sort of activating for different social causes and the like. So I'll start by letting these folks introduce themselves, how they're involved in comics, what kind of work that they do, in a little bit more detail, so you know more than just their names.
Sure. I don't mind starting. It's probably best I start anyways because there's so much talent down here. It just gets better as it goes down. So
It's going to be a whole lot. Can we be equally great, Brian?
Or you can move to the end and then you can get all that extra accumulated credit.
We'll shuffle it around.
We're equally great.
Yes. Well, I'll hold that true. A lot of feelings.
Off to a good start.
I know. I'm holding it down, man. So my name is Brian Parker. I'm the owner, creative director of Believe in Wonder Publishing. It's primarily youth fiction, graphic novels, picture books, middle reader, and I've been doing this stuff for a number of years, but started my press in 2015, and we've got 12 books to our list now. You know, feeling myself pretty good today. You know, feeling like a master. But I mean, I guess the biggest thing is being out there and sharing the stories that I feel that were underrepresented at one point, and just sharing the joy of crafting. You know, artists all over the place, they can appreciate something that has been infused with love and infused with passion. So, yeah. Very good. Cool.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm Ben Passmore. I'm the author of various books. Your Black Friend being probably the most well known. Also, the Dayglow, a whole comic series that people barely read.
I read it.
Thank you. Recently, a book called Bottom Feeders with my friend Ezra Clayton Daniels out by Fantagraphics at the end of the month. I make comics that are about sort of punk culture, subculture, anarchism, identity, various abolitionist critiques. They're sort of less a visibility or a representation sort of kind of thing, and they're more of like a inversion or like sort of journey into certain positionalities, subjectivities. So yeah, that's sort of the connecting tissue. Sometimes that involves tentacles and reflections of a downstream man about queerness, and other times there are much more literal nonfiction stories about cops that threaten to shoot me.
All right, I'm gonna try to follow that. My name is Clara Emiliana. I've done a lot of different projects, but primarily I try to help people publish their own things through graphic design. And there you go. Yeah. So I try to help people publish things through like graphic design and that kind of thing. The works that I do primarily are just trying to kind of decentralize the white and cis narrative and making things as black and as trans as I possibly can, because those are the stories that I relate to the most. So right now I'm actually working on an anthology of just like trans lesbians just trying to like just figure shit out while also being black, and just it's a lot. Yeah.
My name is Nicole Robinson. Online I am Ducky Comics, so you might know me. I am mostly a comics activist and community builder. I run the PDX comic crew, and I try to make a community that people can come and feel safe in creating. Communities where everybody holds each other accountable and asks for their work, so people can get excited for their work and like get comics made. I am also about to start like an all-person of color comic creator crew, and that I am really excited to just make more spaces where people can be themselves and not have to worry about other people taking up too much space or like making them feel like their work isn't valuable and stuff like that. So, and in that, I am that's like a part of my community building is like a part of what I do. I'm also a writer and teacher and like a writer and a teacher and an illustrator, and I also give people resources. So because I do these crews and all of this events and community building, I have a whole bunch of resources for people around the area. So people could come to me and ask for literally anything, and I can usually give you a good answer. I'm just like, oh, you need a website, oh, you need a printer, oh, you need this and that, you need an artist because you're a writer, you need to know how to do this, you need to know how to draw a nose. I got resources for you. I can help you out. And if I don't know how to do it, I probably definitely know somebody who can. I am fairly well connected. So I love building bridges between people so that comics can get made. And I also am just kind of generally a comics activist, and I'm sure we'll get into that later. But yeah, so yeah, that's me. I'm Nikki.
Okay, so my name is Farrell Bowling. I work in HR. So I like to consider myself the world's greatest comic drawing HR professional. Primarily because the work that I do in HR and the work that I do in comics tend to intersect. I got into human resources about 6 years ago for the sole purpose of wanting to make places better places to work. That means that I have quote unquote fun conversations every day. And heavy quotations on that fun. So my primary work that I do is in equity, diversity, and inclusion, and making the places that I work better and more equitable, in places where people feel like they can be a part of those organizations and grow. That is not fun work. It is hard, and often you find yourself looking at your own intersectionality and figuring out what you need to do for yourself. And one of the things that I did before I started working in HR was comics and graphic design. So nowadays, the comics that I make, and I've done some work here and there for a plethora of different publishers over the years. But the stuff that I do now is all self-published, and it falls within that intersection of me grappling and dealing with the idea of sometimes feeling like you're in a wind tunnel screaming, and no one's hearing you. And when they do hear you, you get gaslit, and they tell you, things aren't really happening. And having to deal with how that makes you feel and the kind of weight that can put on your psyche. So my comics tend to thread in those narratives, but in a way that is completely surreal. Like one of the books that a lot of people know me for is They Call Me Black Fist, and it's basically a blaxploitation rockabilly fighting manga. So it's somewhere between Dragon Ball Z and Imelda May. It sounds as weird as that. But I wanted to take a different approach and take that blaxploitation concept and bring it into the 21st century and add in some of the gravitas of having to not be the stereotypical characterization of a black superhero. This is the guy that's literally dressed like a greaser. He's pretty much a black greaser with a black fist on his t-shirt. And so my thing is trying to subvert these ideas of what we expect from a superhero comic. Another book that I'm working on right now is called The Pugilistic Burning Cock of Justice. And it's about a gigantic anthropomorphic rooster with boxing gloves who walks around the United States levying out justice. And it's very tongue-in-cheek, but it also touches on a lot of things that people are dealing with and grappling with today. So that's kind of my approach to comics, and that's my approach to HR. So you need some resume help or anything like that, I'm your guy.
Why does that case of being a giant chicken?
Yeah, I'm all about that. Hey folks, my name's Shaun Wynn. I also do a plethora of things. I have about 15 years experience in comic retail. I'm a former regional manager for Things from Another World and also a former Dark Horse employee, Dark Horse Publishing. I've done a lot of stuff for marketing, some human resources, but mostly within the comic industry. I've been mostly on the business side of things. But outside of that, I've also made it a point to take whatever I can from the business side of things and turn it into a community endeavor in any aspect that I can. And by that I mean scheduling events that are open up to the community, turning what would be just a plain comic retail store into a community center is something that I've been trying to specialize in and have been successful at, to the point that I left Dark Horse and Things from Another World last year and started my own marketing consulting business for nerd culture. So now I've specialized in people trying to start up any type of nerd business and try to make sure that they are community focused, have the right mindset and inclusivity just to get that business off the ground, especially here in Oregon. And that's my main focus for that. But I've actually worked with a few people on this panel, Nikki being one of them. I've actually tapped Nikki for resources myself while starting this business, and vice versa. Another thing that I do as part of my activism is I'm also an MC. So as opposed to just traditional hip hop, which is always the foundation is education and love and togetherness, mine is a little bit more nerd focused. So my group Praetorians is about a fictional army from no specific time, but talking about all of our songs are talking about facing your enemies. So the album is called War Music, and we just talk about the embodiment and feelings of being within war, regardless of who your enemy is and what you need to do to face them. Truth be told, yeah, it's a really violent project. Surprisingly, not a lot of cursing, but I think we get the point across. And that's what I use to community build and focus on getting the messages that I think all of us feel are important out there. That's me.
Good initial question.
Okay, well, what we're going to sort of do is just let this be a kind of conversation, maybe with a couple questions for each other, and then once it sort of comes to its natural conclusion, we'll allow some questions. And Ben says he's got a question, so rather than me, hand it over.
Is that cool? Is that cool if I ask you a question? Okay.
Before we do that question, I was wondering if we could go around and talk about what activism is.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to start, Nikki?
I can start, sure. I'll start it. All right. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So, I'm making a webcomic, and my webcomic is, the premise is I am taking a whole bunch of fonts and typefaces and I'm personifying them into people, and I'm going to, it's going to be a manual on how to, some options of what you can do in some really hard social situations. And it's going to be just full of a whole bunch of different body types, and a whole bunch of different races, a whole bunch of different religious minority, a whole bunch of queer, everybody's queer in there. And some disabled people, both invisible and visible. And I'm really excited about it. And one of the things that I'm aiming to do with that comic is to normalize it, and I want people of color to feel like they are desirable. The first time that I saw a desirable person of color on TV was Justice League Unlimited, was that? Yeah. Jon Stewart. Women fighting over him, and I was young when that came out, and I didn't understand exactly why I thought it was amazing, but I definitely did, and I couldn't tear my eyes away. Now that I'm older and I have words for it, it's because it was the very first time that I ever saw a person of color on TV be fought over or even written as desirable. And I know that it was like Dwayne McDuffie behind the scenes, just like raising hell over at DC Comics, trying to get this out for people to watch. And I'm just like, I'm gonna do that too. I'm gonna make brown people desirable. I'm gonna make disabled people desirable. I'm going to make everybody desirable. And my ultimate goal is to destroy the European beauty standard. And I will kill it before I die. That's something that I really care about. And on top of that, I'm going to give people heroes to look up to. I used to work in daycare, and I had all of the children in daycare, they love superheroes. It's one of the biggest things, but also some little kids didn't have superheroes that looked like them. And they were ostracized from all of the other kids that got to have dramatic play, just kind of like, I'm Captain America, I'm the Hulk, I'm this and that and the other. And then a little black girl comes up, she's like, hey, can I play? And if you're sitting there watching Disney XD, you're not going to see any black woman heroes. I mean, it's just kind of not there. So what I'm doing is I'm giving young kids heroes. I'm going to be writing some children's books, and I'm going to destroy the European beauty standard. That is, and making everybody desirable and not just people who fit in the European beauty standard. That is what I'm trying to do. That's my own personal brand of activism. One more thing. Also giving people a place to come and make comics, even if it's just like an all person of color comic creator crew or an everybody's welcome comic creator crew. That in and of itself is its own personal brand of activism. Making sure that everybody has a safe space to tell the stories that they want to tell, and so that stories can be unapologetic and appreciated and get to publishers, and like making sure that those people that otherwise may not have the resources or allowed enough voice to be seen by, you know, a whole bunch of people. I definitely want them to be able to have the resources and the attention and the audience that they need for these marginalized voices to be heard. And I also teach, and making sure that other people, kids I consider a marginalized group, and making sure kids have a voice too. So that's basically my own personal brand of activism. Yeah. Who wants to go next?
I'll go.
Okay.
I've been a storyteller my entire life, so my journey as a creative has been, it's got a lot. You really need like a Tolkien style map to kind of follow it along. There's lots of mountains and like gorges and giant monsters and that kind of thing. But as far as activism in my work, I think right now positivity is activism in of itself. We live in such tumultuous times. Negativity is rampant, it's persistent, and I think it's destructive of relationships within communities and between people as well. And the work that I do, I feel like is about promoting a more positive and optimistic way of looking at life. Not only through the work that I do as an author and an illustrator, but also through the work that I get to do teaching, which has been one of the biggest joys of being a published author that I could have ever discovered. It's that when you get a chance to sit in front of a crew of 10-year-olds and they're like, I didn't know that a normal person made books, and I'm like, yeah, look how normal I am. You know? I'm king normal. And just talking to young people and empowering them that the stories that they need to tell, the stuff that's going on inside of them individually as a human being, be it, you know, black, white, you know, LGBTQ, any walk of life, the story that you're telling is unique and important. Everyone's story is distinctive, and you need to find a way through whatever form of art or creativity that you can focus it in to tell that story, because there's no other way people in the world are going to understand that particular point of view if you don't find a way to express it. And kids love to know that they're empowered that way, and they love to know that the work that they're making and the things going on in their head are important. So that's been my biggest form of activism through my work.
Do I use both of them?
Good job.
So to me, the term activist is like a positionality of like someone that's like essentially like reforming something. I live in a very small anarchist bubble, and reform is a bad word. But I think to an extent it's important for harm reduction. I've had friends and family that have been in prison. There's a lot of private prisons that don't have a lot of programs for people, not a lot of access to reading, different things for people to do. So that is a context which is important for people to not be destroyed emotionally and mentally, to make things a little better. Someone who is fundamentally anti-capitalist, anti-government, I often feel sort of hesitant to rely solely, or like to devote the majority of my time to reformist projects. It is though complicated, right? Because like ultimately the best way for specifically Black people, but all people, to be free is to end white supremacy, right? That requires a lot of effort, and I would like to see that happen. We'll see. To be continued. So for me, I also have a hard time with activism because it lies within sort of a reformist theme. It's easily sort of co-opted by power, white supremacy. They use Martin Luther King to sell cars. They use Malcolm X to sell all sorts of things, right? So that sort of reveals sort of the limitations of reform in a lot of ways, even though obviously this work can be very important. So for me, and so also because it can be incorporated by the state, big S, or by capitalism, even bigger C, I think that I often feel hesitant to identify as an activist because it is something that ultimately is like a self-aggrandizing job, and as an anarchist, I do not like work. And I do not like to define myself in the answer is yes. And also to sort of define myself and my time based on industrial capitalism. That is the last reference to Marx I will make, I promise. Not even a Marxist. So anyway, so for a while, outside of sort of, in general, I'm currently part of a bail fund in Philadelphia. I founded and organized a indie comic and zine festival in New Orleans that focused on young kids, particularly young kids of color, in one of the poorest states in the country. I was in New Orleans for a lot of the destruction of public housing, organized around that. Anyway, so that is a lot of part of my life. I've never identified as an activist because I am someone who really needs to get free, and these are part of how I see working towards that, and also meeting people that are also very serious about that. So for me, for a long time, my comics, people would be like, "Oh, you make activist comics, or your comics are obviously a part of your sort of like political trajectory," and I would be like, "No, these are books. Sometimes you can throw a book, but ultimately they're books. But I think more recently, particularly." I grew up with people who learned how to read from comic books specifically, and I am also, as the member of a highly obscure peripheral political position, all communities like that talk about their ideas in ways that are totally confusing. Anarchism is so different, and for me, I do believe you're an anarchist. I believe a lot of people are anarchists, but a lot of these ideas are referencing like overly florid, ornate language that is totally useless, and And so for me, a lot of my comics is sort of trying to make those ideas more salient and use language that's more relevant because I think they're important. Does that make me an activist? No.
So to be honest, I kind of just set out like to make comics about my own stories. I didn't really see myself as doing any activism at all. I just kind of, I think the first comic that I ever made that like people really took note of was one called Brilliant Horrid Nightmare, and I literally just wrote about how I was just like bleeding from my genitals after like getting like some trans surgery, and it was just bleak and depressing, and after I published it, I'm like, oh god, it's out there. This is why did I do this? And after that, everyone was just kind of like people on the street were just coming up to me and just like, oh my god, you wrote this thing, that's amazing. I really love it. I'm like, it's just a tiny zine. I'm gonna go cry now. Thank you. I didn't think it was gonna get that kind of a reception, and so like when Nikki invited me, I was just kind of like, do I even do activism? And now I'm just kind of like, yeah, I guess I do. I'm just like, because I'm mostly like talking about like trans stories, and especially like trans people of color. Like I was having a conversation about how I don't go to Pride that much because there's a lot of trans events, but all of the people that go there are all just like white trans women, and like people are always just kind of like, Claire, there's just, you know, there's trans people all over this place. You want to go? And I'm like, they're all white. I don't relate. I don't know. And so I feel like a lot of the comics that I'm making are trying to kind of decentralize that and kind of go, yeah, it's okay. You know, we want to talk about like trans people and the trans identity and the trans identities and that kind of thing. But I also want to specifically talk about that intersection of being a person of color and being trans, because it's different and it's often really scary, and I try my best to also like inject some positivity into it, like Brian was talking about. But it doesn't always work, and sometimes I'm just kind of like, this is what I'm going through, and tough. And then sometimes people will go and just like, wow, you really talked about like bleeding and like all of this other stuff. Are you okay? Are you all right? And I'm like, no, that wasn't a cry for help. That's just like what my friend went through, and they're just like, wow, I didn't know people went through that kind of thing. So I feel like being able to tell those kinds of like narratives really means a lot to me. So I didn't really set out to like do any kind of activism, but I guess that's what I'm doing. So I'm pretty glad. Yeah.
So my life is one big, long conversation with white people about race. It is a never-ending conversation. I don't get Christmas off. We definitely don't recognize the 4th of July. And we sure as hell don't touch Cinco de Mayo. But it gets exhausting. And I did not set out to do this with my life. And I got into HR. I got into HR because I got tired of having crappy HR people. I got tired of working for organizations when I go talk to HR and they'd be like, well, fill out a damn form. So I was like, I need to be different because this can be done differently. And doing this differently became being a voice for people whether I wanted to be one or not. And it ended up intersecting with the work that I do in comics. Primarily because you can't walk around with all of that baggage and not get it out somehow. I'm sure that a lot of white people don't realize that a lot of people of color, we walk around with a whole lot of stuff in our head on a regular basis that we throw into a bunch of different closets in our head to get through the day. It is not healthy. So we have to find ways to get that out. And for me, comics were always, even when I originally started reading comics as a kid, it was always because I grew up poor in Detroit, and it was a way to not focus on the fact that I was poor and living in a 2-bedroom house with 6 siblings. It was a way to get away. But now for me, comics aren't just a way to get away. They're a way to talk about things and code them in a way to get away. There's nothing wrong with wanting to escape. There's nothing wrong with wanting to read a story that technically has nothing to do with fighting the Klan or anything like that. But you can easily put some humanity into anything. And if I can make comics that allow people to walk away with a little nuance of some kind of humanity of something they didn't know, and they really think they just read a kick-ass action comic, but we threw some little subtle things in there that kind of landed, that they get to walk away with, and they're sitting at the table 2 days from now, and they're like, man, I was reading this content and they were talking about that. I didn't realize they were talking about that. Then maybe I've done something. I prescribe to the idea that I talk to probably 600 white people a year, and I probably have only changed 2 of their minds. And it's true, because I have literally had conversations with people that I see at every event I go to, and they have learned nothing. And they say things to me where I'm like, oh my God. In my head, I'm like, I just want to go home now. There's ice cream in my fridge. That sounds really nice right about now. But part of, and I don't know if I consider it activism as much as it's weaponizing the privilege that I do have as a black cisgender male, doing the work that I do, where people don't expect you to be a black person that's competent doing the work that you do. I work for a very white institution, and I'm not going to give the name out because you can pretty much Google me and find it. But they are super white, and we have so many quote-unquote fun conversations that I unpack. I'm doing a comic right now that's basically kind of a self-memoir of getting this ridiculous stuff that I deal with out every day. Because the other thing I realized is that I'm a black guy in HR. HR is already unlikable because no one wants to have to talk to HR. We're automatically the bad guy. And then I'm the black guy working in HR, and that comes with a whole lot of extra stuff. And it's like, so no one likes you no matter what. Like, they don't like me when I'm black. They don't like me when I'm HR. So damn, what have I done with myself? Why did I put myself in this position? And there's a lot to unpack there. And I started talking about some of this stuff, doing different events and talks that I do, and I realized that there are multiple ways to get that message across. Yeah, I could talk to you about it, but I can also put it in a comic and do something visual with it to give it some more gravitas. Because I can tell you stories for days, but I can draw these stories also and give you something else to think about and process. So I don't know if that's activism, but it definitely makes people squirmy. And I'm all about that squirmy. That's my jam. That's my sweet spot.
I would read that. So I think my form of activism presents itself in this manner. With my company, Strange Solutions, the marketing company, we make it a point to focus on 80 businesses that are already talking about inclusivity. And if you're not, honestly, I don't have to take you on as a client. And so I start there. And even if down the line a client has presented a business path that I think will be harmful to what I'm trying to build, I have no problem dropping them either. So that's where it starts professionally. Personally, I go out and I do things like this. As many as I can, as often as I can, to audiences that I may or may not be comfortable with. I don't hold back by any means. But I'm also not a monster either. I'm not out to like. I don't go out to just be like, hey, I came here to make you feel bad. And
Good night.
I hope you still somehow learn something from this. But the prime example, I went out and I did a talk at a theater after a special screening of Get Out. And I am in an interracial marriage, and so they wanted to hear my perspective on it. And I have never seen an audience so pissed off after enjoying the movie. But yeah, I go out to do things like that. And then another like small thing that I didn't think about was a form of activism until I heard you guys talking was so I'm an avid action figure collector. I love toys, always have. That's been my thing. But as an older action figure collector, I realized that at some point I realized there wasn't enough out there for me. So I got into customizing action figures. And what I do is, honestly, I make a lot of people of color characters or just different toys because they're not making them. There's plenty of like, Dukes and Lady J's. Honestly, they make a lot of white action figures, period. And so I take apart these figures, put them together, and I make my own characters, or I'll make the female or the Hispanic or Asian or black character that they're just not making for some reason. And I'll make it, and then I'll put it on Instagram and spread it out and send it to as many places as I can. I tag the toy companies that could have made it, and then let them see how popular this is getting. And honestly, my work isn't the best, But if my crappy work can get some attention, that should tell them something. You know? But again, I don't have any skills when it comes to like actually drawing comics or writing comics. I can critique the hell out of it.
We all just tried. I mean, we all just know what darts to do.
I can critique the hell out of one. So, a lot of people will actually present their projects to me because I have experience in the industry and because I have a sales background. I can show them the numbers of what actually will sell, and maybe give them some confidence on putting out the project that they're kind of shy about putting out there because there hasn't been a lot of success for people of color comics or LGBTQ plus community comics, and they're afraid to put it out there. And I kind of help them just tender it a little bit to make it successful. You know, because like as much as we want to get the message out too, there is still a lot of things that we have to get by to get that out there, and I help to make sure that they can get that out there in the right way that will make it a valuable effort. So that's mainly what I focus on is not just the business with empathy. And that's what I focus on.
I was curious how people feel about sort of like I often reflect on the limitations of representation within like the market. Sometimes like do we all know John Jennings?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so like so John, it's totally fine. It's just another bald man. So he was a co-founder of SoulCon, Latino Black Comics Festival, also the BCAPs on each coast. The Octavia Butler book, Kindred, the Kindred comic. Anyway,
You
very
Black Kirby too.
Black Kirby, very busy. Black Comics Returns. So he's like really busy out here. So I met him and he was talking about just how much he loves Black superheroes. And for me, one, I feel I grew up with superheroes, especially Black superheroes. Problematically, Power Man was very important to me at the time. But to me, particularly now, I'm like, well, superheroes are just cops, right? What is Superman if not a physical embodiment of the state? Anyway,
Fun conversation.
so we can talk about that. But so something that I often think about is and so I'll have that position, and then I remember watching Aladdin. And Will Smith was talking to his light ass kids on the boat. And I was like, I got real teary. I was like, my dad never talked to me. And so it works on me. I guess something I often reflect on, and this is sort of similar to conversations I have with other Black people about reparations, is that if we create a lot of items to buy, and we enjoy seeing ourselves affirmed in the world, which I think is important, and white people buy them, is that enough? Does that ultimately, because something I think about all the time is we all have interacted with a white dude that wears a flat rim that loves old school hip hop and blaxploitation and is wild racist,
Yeah.
So it's like, so to me, it's like them consuming a type of Blackness doesn't seem to be enough. So I often reflect on the potential limitations. We can also talk about reparations if we want to, but these are the things I thought about.
Ooh, let me get it off.
I'm gonna you, Shaun. I'm gonna you.
We got thoughts.
Yes, that has plagued my mind so often, mainly because like I have definitely been at that crossroads where like I want the white people in my either associates, friends, or just in my community to kind of gravitate towards things that we make or stuff that's from our culture. And I struggle a lot because what will happen is somebody will say, yeah, I'm going to go out and get that thing that you talked about but I'm gonna completely ignore all of the reasons you told me to get it, and then I'm gonna make my own assessment or just stick to the own assessment I already had, and like, you know, just roll with that and not actually learn something from it, and then come back to me and go like, so now we've connected, right? No, you missed, you know, that's the point. And I'm glad you said it, because one of the other things that I do is I actually teach a hip hop class. And I teach like a hip hop history class and what it's supposed to be about. And a lot of times I run into a lot of white kids who are just like, oh yeah, I love hip hop. I love NWA and Public Enemy. And that's where it stops. It's like, so you like...
There hasn't been new rap.
You stop right around there.
Like 1980, and you get the most violent group that you can find, and you just said that was what your hip hop experience was going to be, and it stayed there. You know, there's no Boogie Down Productions, no
X-Clan. We just gonna skip all of it.
Right, like there's literally other hip hop artists that were like literally teachers before, and you just skip all of those. So yeah, I'm always at that crossroads where like I want you to have what I love, and I want you to go out there and buy it, but I want you to take on the full embodiment of why we buy it and why we make it. Not just because like you thought it was cool for that 1 second, and now you can show it to your other friends and say, I'm cool because now I have it. Anybody else?
Yeah. Well, my experience as a creative and as a Black creative seems like it's a little bit on the periphery, because my experience as an African American male has been different than just about anybody else I knew. I grew up in Kenai, Alaska. If anybody's ever been to Alaska, you know that I was the only Black person there. Essentially, the only other Black faces I ever saw were my family and the Cosbys. So my sense of identity as an African American male, as a creative and stuff, is it comes from a different start off point. The first character of color that I ever read was Ged from A Wizard of Earthsea. If anybody's familiar with Ursula Le Guin, who writes a really awesome character who is a POC character. But of course, every time I grabbed a copy of the book, the character that they painted on the cover was not a POC character. So I took a lot of time as a kid trying to visualize a POC character in this space, because none of the illustrations reflected it. And I know that all of us has been in that position, especially since we're even here sitting at this table, is that we've had to explain that part of the experience to other readers. You know, a lot of people don't understand how important representation is in a book or in a comic or in television or in film, because they literally have not stood in that place of, oh, I'm a little kid, I would like to be Superman, but could I be Superman? Is there a Black Superman? And of course there's Icon. If you haven't read any Milestone stuff, then that's a good jumping off point for you. But yeah, you have to kind of walk this line between monetizing, giving someone else that, you know, that experience of representation, and walking that line of explaining it while not necessarily demonizing the other person for not having had that experience. Because, you know, even now, as I'm writing a story right now for a graphic novel, and I'm writing an LGBTQ plus character, and I have to ask friends, I have to literally call friends and be like, tell me if this character, am I hitting the experience? Am I using pastiches? Am I using cliches? And they will catch me on my crap, because I have not stood in that position of not, you know, that level of representation within a comic. So everyone comes to this stuff with a sense of, you're taking a little bit, you're taking from someone else's experience. And you have to kind of walk that line of, yes, I am trying to sell something to you so that you can get a little bit of that experience, but it's a back and forth. You know, we're trading information, we're having a conversation. So.
I love when people catch me on the crap.
Yes.
I love justice.
Yes. Yes.
I love when people say, hey, I see you put somebody like me in your comic, but you're not representing me correctly. I'm going to give you some critique. And I'm like, yes, please. Yes, please give it to me.
Yeah.
Please tell me how I can represent you better, because representation is so important. And if you are a writer and you write a comic and you just like completely skip putting a type of person in your comic, that's bad. You should put everybody in your comic. Like your comic should reflect what you see outside, and maybe not Lake Oswego, but maybe in Portland.
Maybe not Portland either. I'm just saying.
But something that's just as bad as not putting a specific type of character in your comic is putting them in your comic and having it be bad representation.
Yeah.
They're both very bad, and I don't know which one is worse. But if you are a writer type person and you are making media, I encourage you to go out and find sensitivity readers. Sensitivity readers are people who you pay to read your story, proofread it, and to tell you about their experiences. And I am a queer Black woman, and I have a huge list of sensitivity readers for my comics. Even though I have like a fair amount of marginalized experiences and voices and stuff like that, things that I would consider myself an expert on. There's still so many experiences and voices that I don't have because I'm a queer Black woman. I don't know about the Indigenous experience. I don't know about the trans experience. I don't know about like what it would be like to, be any of these other things. But my friends do, people online do, and they deserve good representation too. So if you are writing, go ahead and put that person who you've always been nervous to put in your comic in there. They deserve to be in there. They deserve to be seen and heard and represented. But if you're a little nervous about writing them because you don't have that experience, go find a sensitivity reader. Go pay somebody who lives that life and knows that experience and is an expert in that area. Just like, hey, please proofread it. I'll pay you $15 an hour. Let me know how long it took you to read it. Please send me an email about what a home, okay, for instance, I wrote somebody in a wheelchair. I don't personally have any wheelchair friends, but I have found some wheelchair user or mobility device user sensitivity readers, and I was just like, hey, can I pay you to read my comic? And they're like, I can get paid to read comics? Yes, please do. And so I paid them to go ahead and read my comic, and I also paid them to let me ask questions about their life and their experiences. I'm like, what kind of things would a person who uses a mobility device have in their house that a fully able-bodied person might not? And they're like, oh, well, like we've got these medications, you might have a Hoyer lift, you might have a bar near your toilet or by your bed, you might have KT tape, you might have, all of these things. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm gonna put this all in my comic. It's gonna be so lifelike. It's gonna be good representation, and you can get hype about it. You can be excited. I mean, it's always kind of scary to put people who you don't know or don't have that experience in your comic, but do it. Representation is important. So this is a little tidbit for you writers out there. Representation matters. Hire a sensitivity reader if you're nervous. Call your friends. All of that stuff. What?
The mic is being weird. Sorry.
Do it.
When I was a kid, I loved Luke Cage. I loved Power Man. I kind of loved the Falcon. And to an extent, I even loved Black Panther. As an adult, however, I realized I didn't really like those characters, because those characters are people of color written by white people who had no damn idea what people of color were actually dealing with when they created these characters. Mad props to Jack Kirby for creating a character like Black Panther. But if you go back and read those first couple of Black Panther stories, you're like, boy, oh boy, this is a mess. But thank you for making them, I guess. You go back and you look at the history of the character, the Falcon, and he literally is a Satchmo Black sidekick. And when they made him Captain America a few years ago, I'm like, oh great, he gets to be sent to the big kids table now. And then they let that last for about 3 months, and then he was right back to being a lackey for a white guy who's supposed to be a symbol of America. So when it comes to the concept of making characters that represent people and represent things that people are going through, but also want to walk the line between wanting to get paid, it's a nasty line to walk. You want people to take the things that you're making and get something out of them, other than, oh, that was a cool superhero. But you also walk the line of, if you don't want to be quote unquote preachy, or you don't want people to perceive you as being preachy. I'll just put it that way. Now, I won't even put quotes on perceive you as being preachy. You don't want people to perceive that the only thing you're making is black comics, therefore it's not for them, or it's something they can fetishize and enjoy. But you also want to make characters that are real and salient beings. Like, we should be able to believe there can be a black Superman and not have it be steeped in a whole bunch of stereotypes of blackness. Like, he should be able to be Black Superman and not be the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air at the same damn time. Yeah. He doesn't need to be a stereotype. We should be able to see strong black feminine identifying characters, strong queer identifying characters in comics that aren't just an archetype or a stereotype. Like, it frustrates me when I see major companies make a character queer. Like when they made Iceman queer a couple years ago. And I was like, is this what we doing now? I woke up, oh, I'm queer. And I mean, okay, it is an experience. It is an experience. I mean, there are people who live their lives and then they realize that, they've not been honest with themselves and that they're trying to be honest with themselves. But the way it was written was obviously written by someone who did not understand the experience at all, didn't talk to anyone to try to figure out how to touch the experience with the right gravitas. They were trying to make a buck. So it's easy to write black stereotypes or any kind of stereotype, queer stereotypes, feminine identifying stereotypes that'll make you some money that feel comfortable for people. It's a challenge to write things that you want people to actually get something from, where they have no choice but to get something from it, and not be able to kind of make it like, oh yeah, I bought that black comic. Because I've had many a white friends say, oh yeah, I bought that black comic. And then we've had many a fun conversation. And some of those people aren't even my friends anymore. So it's a really nasty line to walk. But I do think that you can feel good about, if you feel good about the work that you're putting out there, you feel good about what you're putting out there, you feel like it's representative of the message that you're trying to get out, then I think you should go for it. And you have to deal with the fact that someone at some point is probably going to fetishize it a little bit. Yeah. And it's going to be something you're going to have to deal with.
Yeah. Sorry. I wanted to add something.
Oh, go for it, yeah.
Just real quick, to jump back to your original question, when you said, is it enough in relation to reparations? And I didn't actually answer that question when I spoke, but I would have to say, after going through this panel and discussing, no, it's not for me. It's not enough for me. And honestly, I don't know what the answer is for reparations or whether we would ever actually get that or not. But I can say buying our media and stuff like that, that is not enough for me because it doesn't come with the education that needs to go behind it. No.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're talking about the education about actually, because I think one of the things that I wanted to say is that while I'm thankful for absolutely every single reader, even all of the white ones and all the cis ones, ultimately the most positive thing that I feel like my works have done is show other people like me, other like trans women of color, that like there are people like them out there that are also making comics. The life of a lot of like trans women of color is mostly sex work, and a lot of people feel like that's all they can do. So the fact that like I'm out here even speaking to you and making comics is kind of an anomaly in and of itself, and that's definitely something I don't take for granted while I'm while I'm like making comics and everything. So I don't know, I think a lot about that every day. But when I think of like cis people who read my comics, is kind of the same as everybody else was saying. Like, I'm gonna have to have a lot of fun conversations with them afterwards because I know they didn't get it, and I feel like a lot of them are just kind of going to go, well, why did she do this? Why did this character do that? Why is there like a liquor store next to the gun store next to like the Busting Jeans store, and this kind of thing? And it's like, well, because I wrote it from like the Bronx, but like in in like Portland, it would just be all of that, but like artisanal. So yeah, I feel like there's definitely like a difference in environment that there's a difference in environment that I feel like a lot of people don't really kind of take into account when they read some of these comics, and I think it's kind of funny because for a lot of white and cis people that like read my comics, they're just like, that's obviously not real, like that obviously didn't happen, that's clearly fantasy, you clearly embellished, and I'm just like, no I didn't, it's all the reality of it. But like until they actually see somebody going through that, it doesn't sink in. And even the few people that have had like the uncomfort, like one of the things that like really pisses me off is that my name is Clara Emiliana, but constantly I get misgendered and get called Mr. Clara Emiliana, and I'm just like, think about that for a second. Think about it. Think about why that's weird. Think about why it's weird. But a lot of people don't like think about it, and like the same people who have read my comics have also called me Mr. Clara Emiliana, and I'm just like, okay, that's cool, I guess. You know, this is you didn't get anything out of it. I can already tell. You know, yeah. So I want there to be like more like education. Like I wish that my comics would be able to like, you know, get into the people's brains and just go, oh, this is what like trans women of color are like, and this is what they like are doing and everything. But no, it doesn't really work that way. So I try to like keep, because of this kinds of things, I try to like keep like the money and the resources within my communities. But as far as like educating white people, I'm just kind of like, if they gravitate towards me and they want to like have the painful conversation, like all right, but I'm not gonna really pull any punches either. You know?
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, if you read a comic or you read a book about someone's experience that isn't yours, please do not go find someone that you know. Please don't put this burden on your queer friend or your black friend or your Asian friend. Hey, I read this thing. Because that automatically makes us want to punch you. It's one of those things where we understand you. This is my life like every day. We, as marginalized people, when we're creating art, when we're trying to get messages out there in our art, when we're trying to depict our experiences, we do not want to also have to give you an online bibliography to go with it. The concept of reading anyone's experience and absorbing anyone's experience is to be piqued. You have your curiosity piqued about that experience and to learn more yourself. It is not for us to do the labor for you. It is not for, if you want to pay me, sure, we can do some labor. I have some pretty good rates.
Me too.
I work for about $100 an hour. If you want to roll with that, we can definitely roll with that. But the whole idea of creating work and wanting someone to take your work is to get a feel for someone else's experience and then to dive in more and learn more about a person's experience. To go to someone that you feel might have the experience, because one thing is that you can't always think that everyone's experience is the same. Like I can't write for all black people.
Yeah.
Like, believe me, God, I cannot write for all black people. My black experience is way different than everyone else's.
Yeah.
Than the black experience of other people on this panel. I don't have any connection. I'm learning about other aspects of the queer experience that I didn't know, but I'm learning, and I'm looking for this information myself. And when I'm getting this information, I'm touching base with people to make sure I'm understanding it right. Not putting the burden on them to teach me, but to make sure I'm going in the right direction with my learning and understanding. The concept of reading marginalized voices and absorbing the information from marginalized voices, that we want you to go learn more. But we don't. We already wrote the book. We don't want to have to do an online tutorial for you too. I mean, this stuff is intensive. It takes a lot out of people to have to do consultations on this kind of thing as a part of their regular life. As far as reparations are concerned, there is not one thing that a white person can buy from me or pay me for that would make it okay. That we are still 300 plus years into a system of oppression that just keeps changing its name and changing the pieces on the board. So they can't pay me enough to make me feel okay and to be like, okay, we're square. Because once you try to make it square with me and mine, then you probably need to try to make it square with all the indigenous people y'all took out when y'all got here. So y'all have a whole lot of work. Reparations aren't exactly going to fix it. That whole 40 acre and a mule thing definitely didn't work. And we're looking at a whole lot of nasty mess that a lot of marginalized people are dealing with. So my views on reparations aside, because I think there should be something done. I do not think that people buying my stuff is and not really getting anything out of it definitely isn't a way to make things square. And just buying my stuff in general, even if you got something out of it, we're still not square.
Now this might just be the conceit of a creator, but when you buy my work, please, I would like for you not to buy my work because you feel like you're paying black people back.
Yes.
I think you would buy my work because it's good.
Yes.
There's an exorbitant amount of years applied to perfecting my craft. So I consider the work to be of top-notch quality. And yes, if you read it and you pick it up, you will get a glimpse into a person's experience that is completely different and individual from your own, which is what you want whenever you pick up any piece of literature. If you're picking up stuff that is just reinforcing your own biases in your own lifestyle, then you need to explore other works across the board. And but that being said, if you are getting into this stuff, if you're getting into black comics, if you're getting into queer comics, and you're trying to read this so that you can get a better understanding of all the people in that demographic and in that person group, then it's not going to work. You're going to get a better understanding of that person, that one person. And I think that we kind of worry about trying to get these kind of cliff notes of people, lots of people, through all of the media that we absorb. We try to get it through television, we try to get it through literature, we try to get it through the news, and I don't think it works at all for any group of people. Cliches and stereotypes and stuff, although they sometimes do encompass some personality traits of people, they never encompass all of a person. I'm a foster parent. I have 2 adopted kids. Both of them were born with major issues of drug exposure when they were in utero, and of course, the state right away wants to label them. This is that. They're going to be this. They're going to be that. One's 5 now, and one's 2. They are nothing like what anybody ever expected. I don't think that anybody does. It doesn't matter what their experience or where they grew from. You cannot have an expectation of that person based on that origin, because it never pans out. So approach it that way. I think that approaching it that way, if you're trying to understand maybe that author's experience, that author's passions, as opposed to trying to use it as a Cliff Notes to understanding a demographic, and I think she'll probably pan out better. I don't read Margaret Atwood because I think it tells me about women. I read Margaret Atwood because it tells me about Margaret Atwood, who is a really good writer. So
yeah, it's that was actually, I was thinking about like a next question, just sort of about that. I mean, I think we're all like really aware, particularly as people that make work are in mixed spaces, that like there's a tendency to sort of like the phrase I use is James Baldwin, like turn you into a James Baldwin, which I did just straight up weird, gross sci-fi comics for the longest. Like many people, unless they met me, had just thought I was a white guy. They were like, they had no idea, right?
Black guy draw that.
Yo, actually, this is an aside. So like a lot of my first readers were on the internet, on like game boards and stuff. And a lot of these students, when they found out I was black, they were like all right people. And they're like, I got some wild emails. They're like, I can't believe it. How dare you? This whole time.
All the no
Yeah. You might like black people. I don't know. But yeah, there is this like, to me, there's a push and pull. Okay, so like for me, and it's like I'm from Western Massachusetts, a super white town. I grew up on a black street in a super white town with my white mom. I talk like Don Lemon. In a room of black, if there's a room full of black people, a white person comes in, I'm gonna get their jokes about iron and wine. You know, like I'm gonna get, you know, I saw Seinfeld. You know, like, you know what I mean. So like when it comes to these specific conversations, I recognize that I am going to both because of who I am and how I'm enculturated, I know that there's a lot of things that I can say that we would all say that people are going to listen to. Also, like when I made the comic Your Black Friend, that was a joke on so many levels. A lot of people did not get. Hey, you bought the book, thank you.
Appreciate it. Take it
I will take your white guilt dollar. I'm so broke. But there was like a, you know, obvious, like in the book, like my position, it's, I guess the joke, which maybe it's a bad joke, maybe too subtle. I don't claim to be a great writer, but you know, it was such a experience in a lot of ways. It was specific to me. You know what I mean? There's jokes about black capitalism in there. I'm for sure not all black people agree with me. You know what I mean? And that's not even what I was trying to do. And I think in general, I find myself being like a lot, to my knowledge, still like across all genres, the majority of comic readers are white. Still. So I know that probably the odds are that more white people are going to read the comic that I write are going to be white. And I make decisions based off of however I'm feeling or what I'm talking about to write with them in mind or to not. You know, I'll use certain languages, certain words maybe. Maybe I'll leave it out ways that I talk to my friends. But that does feel like, particularly in a time right now, where it's sort of interesting, we're like in a post Get Out world, where I felt like there's sort of like a wider understanding about what stories we're allowed to tell, like what's marketable. I started trying to sell TV shows. These people would never talk to me before that. You know? But there is still a limitation, you know what I mean? And sometimes it does feel like if there's pain, you know, if there's the text or subtext of a specific kind of POV, it does end up being lucrative, you know, which is a complicated feeling. I don't know how you all feel about that. And my assumption, if Cory Booker gets elected, we might not get the money so much. Because they went wild when Obama got elected. I won't talk about that.
Just the fact that David Walker's book with Sanford Green, Bitterroot, got picked up by a big publishing company. If you guys haven't read David Walker, he's a Portland area super writer and very grumpy guy who I love very much.
He's nice what you guys know. He's like Garfield.
Yeah. Mondays.
Every day.
Yeah. But and I know just from conversations with him and stuff that he had, you know, he had run into problems because he's very vocal about issues of color, issues of diversity in the comic world, that he had pushback from editors and stuff like that at big publishers. But they always bring him back because he's a great writer. And then just recently, it's a collection of what? It's like 8 or 9 issues, the first trade of six issues. And that got picked up by a major film production company, and it's black. It's beautifully black, but you know, it's like Harlem Renaissance, but also steampunk, and there's demons, and at one point he kills a whole group of KKK guys in the middle of the woods who turn out to be demons underneath their masks, and it's heavy, but at the same time, I don't think that it would have been optioned, you know, 3, 4, 5 years ago and stuff. And I feel like the landscape is changing as far as us as a group, us as a people kind of being empowered to tell the stories that we've always wanted to tell, but also that there's going to be eyes on it. Because it is kind of tough sometimes to tell these stories, to tell the stuff that's important to you and feel like you're doing it in obscurity. Because the creative process is a joy, but I got kids. And they eat a lot.
I just wanted to touch on that real quick, Brian. I do see, because honestly, this is my business. This is what I watch things like that. I watch to see what's marketable, what's sellable, and truth be told, like yes, I've watched the change and followed the stats for the last couple of years, and we are moving that way. But I will be honest to say that I'm afraid for it as well.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of wrong motivations behind it. Because right now, yes, finally making superhero movies with women is sellable or marketable, or making people of color movies or LGBTQ plus shows or anything or characters. It does feel a little patronizing sometimes. They put it out there in certain ways. I don't trust the people behind them putting it out there. Because it's the same old thing that we all have witnessed at one point. You know, when McDonald's have somebody rapping in the commercial, you know they just trying to sell us hamburgers.
Legit, yeah.
Right? So I watch with scrutiny a little bit, but I want it to happen.
Yeah.
And I want the right people behind those, but I'm also always afraid of that other person that's just going to be like, oh, I better jump on this right now because black folks are selling.
Yeah.
And they just going to put out something that they think we like.
I had the opportunity to hear Tommy Orange speak recently. For those of you who may not know who he is, he's an indigenous novelist. His first book, Dare Dare, which is an incredible novel, is pretty much shortlisted to win the Pulitzer this year. He talked about white people liking his book. And he talked about how there's some really tense, real stuff in his book, some experiences that Native and Indigenous people go through that are pretty much never really written like this. And he talked about white people walking up to him and being so joyful about this book that has this kind of slightly negative stuff in it about the things that Indigenous people are going through, because he writes his book from a lens of the portraits of 8 different Indigenous people and their journey to this annual powwow that they're all going to, and the book ends really messed up, but it's very real. And he's just like, these people are coming to him, they're so joyful about this book, and he coined the term that it was how did he put it? He said it was white fragility guilt porn. Where basically organizations, movie studios, publishing houses, they love our stories when they can sell it on pain. And they can talk about things that people are, oh, see, this is a thing that black people go through. Oh, this is the thing that Indigenous people go through. And Tommy Orange talked about how his book is written just from the perspective of 8 different people. And they just happen to be Indigenous people. Like, one of the stories is about a gentleman who's dealing with weight issues and kind of his journey and how that kind of goes into Indigenous culture. But he was like, he had white people coming up to him like, I've had that struggle too. And he's like, a struggle with your community about being Indigenous and how this looks when you're not supposed to really be losing weight. You've had this experience? I'd love to hear about it. So I feel leery about it too, because I want people to succeed. I want to see these stories on the screen. But I feel like what happens is the same thing that happened with Get Out. I love Get Out. Get Out helped my wife understand a lot of things about me. My wife is white, and I was like, this is how I feel when I go to your parents' house. When y'all take me out to hell of nowhere, California, to the family barbecue, and they talk about how all the Colombians and all the blacks are bringing the drugs in the country. This is how I feel. But on the flip side, I've gone to multiple screenings of Get Out where they have those discussions at the end. And I had this discussion with my sister-in-law, and she said that movie was so funny. And I was just like, you need to get your sister away from me. I'm gonna go sit in the car and think about this. Because that's what it comes down to. It's great that things like Bitterroot are getting an opportunity to possibly go to the big screen. I think it'll work better as a miniseries. But because they like to condense everything in an hour and a half. I'm loving that these things are getting a platform. I'm loving that studios are seeing that this is viable and that people want to see diverse voices and diverse ideas. But at the same time, I often feel like there's some undercurrent in Bitterroot and talks about some stuff. And it's set in the Harlem Renaissance. It deals with some stuff. There's some spooky booky stuff going on, but there's some real raw race stuff going on in that book too. And I feel like it'll just be, oh yeah, this supernatural black thing and the whole idea of what the other things that David Walker's touching on, and it will be lost. And I feel like that often is what happens. I see these things kind of get morphed into something that they're not, and they're made palatable for audiences. And that's the dread that I have. That yeah, you're buying up all these properties, but you're not going to handle them in the way that they should be handled so they actually are effective and they actually put a narrative out there that's not the same narrative. That's my fear about it. I'm waiting for them to show me otherwise.
So I grew up in the Bronx, and it's a place in New York that until recently, because it's getting gentrified, like people were afraid to go there. So if I ever said, oh, I'm from the Bronx, like people would just go, like especially white people are just like, all right, bye, thank you for your time. Because they had like that certain kind of stereotype that like everyone in the Bronx is dangerous and we're carrying guns and we're in a gang and we're gonna like kill you or whatever, and like meanwhile I'm just like, all right, I'm gonna go home and play some PlayStation. But like, so I feel like these conversations are kind of similar to the conversations that I was having with like white friends in like high school and college. I even had one white friend specifically just kind of go, I want to go to the Bronx, and I'm like, really? You're like the one person that's not terrified? She's like, no, I'm terrified, but that's why I want to go. It's like, and it was like this weird like dark tourism for her. And she was like, I want to like go and like see all the guns, the gangs, and the drugs. I'm so excited for it. And she's just like on this shit, and I'm just like, this might be the end of our friendship. I don't know. I'm really scared right now. But when I like think about the conversations that we're having on this table, it kind of like makes me think back to that, and I feel like a lot of the like executives and a lot of like the people who are like in comics business, especially the white ones, are just kind of like, yeah, we're gonna like talk about all of the dark shit that like people of color are going through. Isn't that exciting? And I'm like, I'm nervous that like that's the part that you're like excited for, especially since like if I, like somebody is gonna go like that same friend, for example, if I were to put like a comic in front of her about the Bronx, she would like tear it up. But like if I tell her, let's go to the Bronx and let's go to the South Bronx and let's go to like to where all of like the dilapidated buildings are and everything, that's where like all of a sudden the crying starts and everything, and I'm just like, you're not even gonna like really want to interact with the like actual place. And so I don't know, I just wanted to add that because I thought like it feels like the conversation is always like happening like over and over again, and,
It's about 4:20. We're a little worried we're going to take up the whole time. So unless you guys have more you want to say, we can take some questions.
Questions. Let's go.
I can start off with one. Emily Lewis, who was here earlier, she had to leave. But she was curious what you guys thought. So Emily Lewis was here earlier. They did a zine demo. She works with a local non-profit that helps female, genderqueer, and LGBT youth publish and make comics. Miss Anthology. And she was curious what you guys did or thought or sort of worked with about safe space policies, because they sort of work with also Marrow, which is a teen and youth group. And so she was curious, just because they have theirs, but they want to know what she wanted to know what you thought.
This is me.
Yeah.
Hello. So, when it comes to making a space where you want people to be creative, you need to be able to guard it.
Yeah, that one's weird. Sorry.
You need to be able to guard it. You need to be able to protect your space, and you need to be able to tell people if they're taking up too much space, if they're being too loud next to people with like learning disabilities or like sensory processing disorders. You need to be able to talk frankly to people in your space. This is why a lot of the most successful meetups that I've seen have happened in home, where somebody has complete control over who comes in and who goes out of it.
Yep.
Oh, okay, who comes in?
No one comes out.
And it's a lot harder. Who comes in? And it's a lot harder to keep your space safe for everybody when you're in a public place. I've had lots of problems with this. People take up too much space. They're too loud next to people who need a quieter space. People are saying super tone deaf things to trans people or genderqueer people, and people are saying off-color things to the people of color. People are pushing other people, saying like, or just like not even being so out there and violent to the point where you would be comfortable saying, hey, get out of my space, you have crossed the line. In public spaces, it's more like, where is the line? Where is the line where you want to be able to like let this establishment make the money off of you being here, but also like I want to protect the people that are here. So if you want to be able to create a safe space and you want to make it comfortable for trans people or people of color or body diverse people or religious minority, you need to be able to be approachable if you are heading that space. So if somebody comes up to you just like, hey, somebody pushed me out of my chair and I didn't like it, you need to be able to like let people go ahead and tell you those things, even like tiny little things, which is like it was off color. I don't even know if it was a problem or not, but I did want to let you know just in case this was like a reoccurring thing. Or you need to be able to just kick people out of your space. You need to have that power, or else your safe space doesn't work. And you need to be able to be unapologetic about it and be like, I've spoken to you 3 times, 3 strikes are out. I'm sorry, go find another space to be in. When it comes to kids, it's super lame when you have to deal with kids, but sometimes it's necessary. Some kids don't care about other people's experience. Some kids are loud around people who need it quiet. And you can talk to these kids and you can include them all you want, but if they're being jerks, kids can be jerks. And you want to be able to make sure everybody's voice is heard. So kids can be jerks. I mean, like, it's not like they're going to be jerks for the rest of their lives. People change, kids change.
There are forks in the road.
But like some kids are just mean and they don't care. Some kids get a thrill out of it. So like if you want to have a safe space for people to create, you need to definitely have boundaries, a set of rules, and you follow these or you're out. I'm sorry, but like these are the boundaries. They need to be followed. So yeah, in my experience of creating spaces and doing event planning, you need to maintenance and have power over your group or your space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, I have run several retail nerd establishment comic shops mostly, but I knew right away that I was going to use my position of looking like this, which can be kind of intimidating, to make sure that was my domain, and that I made sure that everybody that came in and knew that what I wanted from my space, which was I want everybody in here working together to be in this being a safe space. And if you didn't abide by that, I had no problem just saying, well, you can get them. And I didn't care at the time about loss of sales or anything like that, as from a business standpoint, because I firmly believe that if you're pushing those people out that are ruining it for everybody else, you will eventually widen those doors to make sure the people you want to come in. Because if you're not making an all-inclusive space, especially now, what are you even doing in business?
And you're pushing out other business too.
Yeah.
If you let somebody just sit in your space and act a fool, you're going, like, sure, you're keeping them, but these 5 people that are uncomfortable may not come back to your space ever.
Right.
and
And those
you think
5
about it
people-
every day.
Those 5 people have friends, and those 5 people have voices. You know, and it's not just to appease them. You know, I'm firmly against, like, why would I want anybody that I have come into my establishment to have a bad time in the first place? Like, that's the whole reason I'm here.
So,
You know? And if you can't be a part of the community that I'm building, you can't come back.
that's it.
Yeah.
Are there
Well,
any?
can I just elaborate on that just a little bit? Well, not elaborate, but just throw a little more in there on that, in that good gumbo of stuff that you just threw out there. Especially when you're working with young people, I think that having a collaborative and cohesive opportunity for them to share their ideas is imperative, because I don't know if it's always been the case, but I know that it's the case right now, that young people are like almost frightened sometimes to be expressive of their ideas. It's easy for them to be expressive about the kind of things that they know that their peers are going to respond to, the same memes, the same stupid jokes. I mean, teenagers are teenagers, but the stuff that's really impactful, stuff that's really important to them, anybody that makes this kind of stuff, anybody that makes art, it's about vulnerability. It's about, here, this is all my soft parts, this is all the stuff that is important to me, whatever. And you get beat up, you get hurt, but if it's not in a space where you feel comfortable being hurt and learning, then there's no way they're going to expose those really important stories that they have to tell. And I've been really lucky that the last couple of times I got a chance to teach in young adult or high school environments, that the kids were just so responsive to each other. I was just like, oh my God, when do people get so cool? High school was horrible to me. It was just terrible. It was the gauntlet the whole damn time. But I feel like it's being communicated earlier. So that's great.
You're so lucky when you get like that group of kids with that really cohesive synergy, and you're like, let's make comics, and then they're just like, yes, teacher,
Yes.
and then you just like pop out all of these amazing things.
Oh man, it's always that nervous one that's in the back he's talking to just his friends, but then right at the end he'll come up and be like, I had this idea about this guy that was in a spacesuit and he's like left in space and he's all this artwork, it's just all there, and it's like I met Rembrandt and he's 16 and I'm like, I just want to kiss you on the board. So, but if they didn't have that, that space to be comfortable and vulnerable in it, you'd never see it. It would stay in that notebook until they were like 25.
Yeah.
Are there any questions in the audience?
Yeah, matter of fact, it kind of relates to this when you're getting children. When you're writing, do you prefer to write about where you are or where you would like to be? Where the world, you'd like the world to be?
That's a good question. That mic's off.
A world where all the mics work.
Both. Like, not only do I want to tell people about my experience, but I also want to model how people can and should interact with each other for a better world and to stay positive in general. I want both. I do both. It's like, because I write fiction, I can, I haven't yet done a memoir, and which would be one. But if you write fiction or you do sci-fi, if you do fantasy, you can have like a nice little mixture of both. And that's my sweet spot.
Yeah, I would say both, but it probably leans 70-30. 70% toward, I need you to understand what's been going on and what's going on now. Because I feel I can't do the other 30% if I can't get you to understand the 70%. You have to have a springboard, go somewhere. And I mean, and being able, and writing on both ends, whether I'm doing something fictional or I'm doing the kind of professional / personal memoir I'm working on right now, A lot of it is setting the basis for understanding what people are going through now. Like in the book that I'm working on, I'm talking about being black and being in HR and higher ed, which is literally the whitest situation you could find yourself in. Any place you work, I'm guaranteeing you, higher ed is as white as it gets. It is very white and patriarchal and very structured in a way that constantly has you gaslighting yourself and making sure that you're not lying to yourself. And I feel like I need people to understand that. Because you have to understand that before we can talk about a 30%. And it's not all negative. That 70% isn't all negative. That 70% sometimes is pretty funny because humans are weird. And man, oh man, can I tell you some stories. One thing I learned from working in HR is people have stuff. And they unleash it on each other and they unleash it on you. And it's up to you to help people understand that stuff. So I feel like if I can't impart what I need to do in the 70%, then the 30% will be meaningless for me. I need you to understand so then you can move forward and we can go into the 30%. But also with an understanding that sometimes it's going to be funny, and other times it's just going to be a little rough and it's going to be uncomfortable. And it's something that we have to process. Part of that 70% is a lot of discomfort and self-work.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that because I feel like that's actually really, really similar to me as well. Like I write mostly about where I am and like Farrell was saying, the 30%. I like to write about that 30%, but especially when it comes to the subject matters that I tend to deal in, which is again like trans women of color, a lot of the times people are just not familiar with that at all. Like they have zero basis whatsoever. So if I'm talking about like the future of where we're going, a lot of people are just like, well, wait a minute, is this even real? And so that's where I kind of have to like, kind of ground it to earth and just go, yes, and let me explain how, and let me explain why, and let me explain all of these like different environments. And so I definitely like to write a lot about the where I am now for sure.
I think a lot of work that I do, particularly more genre stuff, I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about things. I mean, there's a lot of just life that is, probably takes just all the time you got, right, to like figure out. The nonfiction stuff that I do a lot of work for the NIB, because I'm mostly interested in like really, I guess you would call grassroots or sort of like decentralized movements. I guess I like want to talk about sort of ideas and histories that I think are not necessarily known. Like an example, and also like try to explain. I don't know. Like I would really like to see us move from sort of political concepts being interests of people and be like things that people are more invested in. I think it's the same thing with like blackness or like the situation of black people or something. But like I wrote about. Right after the Charlottesville, like the big Charlottesville thing, there's been a couple marches, but obviously we always mean one particular one. So I was writing about Charlottesville, Antifa, and like Nazis and like the alt-right, and was writing about what happened, but also sort of explaining what happened. I started doing a lot of nonfiction stuff after sort of like the rise of Black Lives Matter, and I was like in my late 20s. And a lot of the people that I saw getting involved, particularly in New Orleans, were pretty young and hadn't had, like I've been an anarchist since I was 16 and we took over part of my school. And a lot of these other people for a lot of different reasons didn't have like a lot of practice in praxis. So for me, I wanted to specifically say like, this is my understanding, this is how I like know where things are coming. This is how I understand where things are coming from. So for me, I would really like, in that sense, for people to sort of, I would like to be a part of a conversation where people are developing tools. I am, even though anarchism is a performative and prefigurative politic, I don't have any particular faith in the future, or that there will be one, maybe, but for me, I think that if I'm a futurist, I am very interested in sort of future action, whether or not that's like 5 minutes from someone reading a comic or 5 years. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
comments, thoughts, observations.
We answered all your questions.
Does anybody have a song they wish to sing?
So I want to just also say, like, an important thing is to support artists. Ben has some work here on sale if anybody wants to plug their own work or spaces. Feel free, now is the time.
You can buy everything that I've ever made. Go to believeandwonder.com. It's the name of my publishing company, and I have links to everything so that you can buy it all there. I've got children's fiction, middle reader, YA, graphic novels, the whole spiel.
You can follow me on Twitter, Clara Emiliana, and that also links you to my website. I do a lot of commissions. I'm about to release a card game and a comic book, and yeah.
Here's my business card. Please follow me on Twitter and Facebook. I have a lot of stuff in the works, and I would, if you were interested in my work or anything I have to do or say, please message me. I love talking to people. Also, you can just kind of, I will keep people posted on my projects. I'm about to come out with like this really sweet webcomic. I'm thumbnailing it right now, and if you like stayed tuned and followed me, that'd be so great. Business cards. Take one.
Business cards here too. Like I said, I am the world's greatest comic drawing HR professional. So when I'm not doing comic, when I'm not practicing HR and trying to burn down the establishment from the inside like an evil person, I make comics and I do a lot of writing and talking about real things that are going on, both personally and professionally. You can follow me online. Literally farrellboating.com. I bought my own name because no one else has it. And I'm also on pretty much every bit of social media platform you can find, and we have wonderful, robust discussions that sometimes I have to make sure don't derail. But I also post about stuff that I'm working on, comics I'm working on, events that I'm at, and I'm also available for consultations and also trainings, talks, etc. So grab a card, drop me a line.
And you can find me under Shaun Wynn. I'm on all social media platforms. You can also follow my company, Strange Solutions, on our website, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you have anybody that is looking to start up a nerd-related or pop culture business that needs some guidance, please direct them towards me. I will gladly help them out as long as they have something that actually makes sense.
Awesome.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.